The screaming stopped at dawn. Captain Jinho stood on the bridge of his ship, the Soul's Pride, staring at the empty space where Melodia Prime used to be. 3 days ago, this system held 12 billion peaceful beings. Now there was nothing but floating metal and silence. "Sir, we're picking up a weak signal from the fourth moon," said Lieutenant Hana from her station. Her voice shook as she spoke. It's very faint." Jinho nodded. "Take us there. Full speed." The Soul's Pride moved through the debris field. Pieces of Melodian ships drifted past the windows like dead leaves. Jinho had seen war before, but this was different. This was not war. This was hunting. The Vorthak had been here. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Vorthak. They were the monsters that lived in the dark corners of space. 12 feet tall with black skin like armor and claws that could cut through steel. They had been killing and conquering for 3,000 years. No one had ever stopped them. No one had ever even slowed them down. The signal came from a small research station on the moon's surface. When Jinho's team found the source, they discovered Dr. Mira hiding in a storage room. She was the only Melodian they found alive in the entire system. "They came from nowhere," Mira whispered as the human medic treated her wounds. "Our defense fleet tried to fight, but their weapons did nothing. The Vorthak ships just went through our shields like they weren't there." Jinho knelt beside her. "How many ships did they have?" "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. They didn't even use all of them. Most just watched while the others did the killing." Mira's eyes were wide with terror. "Captain, they're not like other species. They don't want our planets or our resources. They just want us dead." "Why?" asked Jinho. "What do they gain from this?" Mira looked at him with pity. "They enjoy it. They hunt us for fun. And Captain, they know about Earth. I heard them talking about it on their communications. They have your location." The words hit Jinho like a physical blow. Earth, home to 42 billion humans in the heart of human space. If the Vorthak went there, "How long do we have?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe weeks, maybe days. They move fast when they want to." Mira grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "You have to warn your people. You have to make them run. Hide. Scatter across the galaxy. It's the only way some might survive." Dr. Mira died an hour later from her injuries. Her last words were a warning about something she had overheard. The Vorthak were not just coming for Earth. They were bringing their entire war fleet, every ship they had. They wanted to make an example of humanity that the whole galaxy would see and remember. Jinho sent the news back to Earth immediately. Then he called for an emergency meeting of the Galactic Council. As the Soul's Pride raced toward the council station, he wondered if it would make any difference. The council was good at talking, but the Vorthak did not care about words. The council station was a massive structure that floated in neutral space between 12 different star systems. Representatives from hundreds of species worked there, trying to keep peace in the galaxy. It was one of the few places where everyone was supposed to be safe. When Jinho arrived, the Great Assembly Hall was already full. News of Melodia's destruction had spread quickly. Ambassador Hyunsik, humanity's representative, met Jinho at the entrance. "How bad is it?" Hyunsik asked. "As bad as it gets," Jinho replied. 12 billion dead in less than 6 hours, and they're coming for us next." The two men walked into the hall. The atmosphere was tense. Species that normally argued about trade routes and mining rights were united in their fear. Everyone knew that if the Vorthak could destroy Melodia so easily, any of them could be next. Chancellor Vex of the Altarian Republic called for order. His blue skin was pale with worry. "We have all heard the reports from the Melodian system. Captain Jinho of the Human Colonial Defense Force was one of the first to arrive at the scene. Captain, please tell us what you found." Jinho stood and faced the assembly. Hundreds of different species looked at him with fear and hope. "The Melodian system is gone. Not just defeated, completely destroyed. We found one survivor who confirmed that the Vorthak fleet is now heading for Earth." A wave of whispers swept through the hall. Many of the representatives had never seen a Vorthak, but they all knew the stories. Entire civilizations wiped out overnight. Species that had ruled star systems for millennia, reduced to scattered refugees hiding in deep space. "What are humanity's plans?" asked Counselor Thrain, a tall, insect-like being from the Kepler sector. Ambassador Hyunsik stood up. "We are still discussing our options." "Options?" Thrain's voice rose to a screech. "There are no options. You must evacuate immediately. Scatter your population across the galaxy. It is the only way any humans will survive." Other voices joined in agreement. The Zephyrian delegate stood on his chair, waving his forearms. "The Vorthak have never been stopped, never. Every species that has tried to fight them is extinct." "Wise course is clear," said Chancellor Vex. "Humanity must abandon Earth before the Vorthak arrive. We can help relocate your population to safe worlds." Jinho looked around the hall. These beings were terrified. They had lived under the threat of Vorthak attacks for so long that running away seemed like the natural response, but something inside him rebelled against the idea. "And after they finish with Earth?" Jinho asked. "Who will they hunt next? How many more systems will burn before we decide to stand up to them?" The hall fell silent. No one wanted to answer. That question, Ambassador Hyunsik stepped forward. "The human government appreciates the Council's concern. We will consider all options and respond appropriately." But Jinho could see the doubt in Hyunsik's eyes. The ambassador was a good man who wanted to save lives. Right now, running seemed like the smart choice, the safe choice. As the council session continued, Jinho's mind wandered. He thought about Earth, the blue oceans and white clouds, the cities where his family lived, the colonies where human children played under alien suns. All of it would be gone if the Vorthak came. He thought about Dr. Mira's final words. The Vorthak wanted to make an example of humanity. They wanted to show the galaxy what happened to species that dared to exist in their space. If humans ran, now the message would be clear. Even the newest species in the galaxy were too afraid to fight. But what if they didn't run? What if humanity stood and fought? It would probably mean extinction. The Vorthak had never lost a battle. They had never even been seriously challenged. Human weapons and ships were primitive compared to most galactic civilizations, and those civilizations had never even scratched a Vorthak hull. Still, something deep inside Jinho rebelled against the idea of surrender without a fight. Humans had not crawled up from the mud of Earth and reached for the stars just to hide in the dark when the first real threat appeared. After the council session ended, Jinho and Hyunsik walked to the observation deck. Through the transparent aluminum windows, they could see the stars of the galaxy stretching out in all directions. "They're probably right, you know," Hyunsik said quietly. "Running might be our only chance." Jinho nodded. "Probably. But I keep thinking about something my grandfather told me. He was a soldier in the last Earth War before we reached space. He said the worst thing about bullies is not what they do to you. It's what they make you become." "What do you mean?" "If we run now, we become a species that runs, forever. Every time something threatens us, we'll scatter like leaves in the wind. Our children will learn that being human means being afraid." Hyunsik was quiet for a long moment. "And if we fight, our children might not exist at all." "Maybe," Jinho agreed. "But if they do exist, they'll know their parents tried to stand up to the monsters." The two men stood in silence, watching the stars and wondering what choice their species would make. Somewhere out there in the darkness, the Vorthak war fleet was coming. Soon, humanity would face its greatest test. The question was not whether they could win. The question was whether they would try. Admiral Soman stood before the largest gathering of military leaders in human history. The underground command center on Luna Station buzzed with activity as officers from every human colony took their seats. The weight of their species' future pressed down on everyone in the room. "The Galactic Council's recommendation is clear," Soman said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "They want us to evacuate Earth and scatter across the galaxy. They believe it's our only chance of survival." General Taewon, a gray-haired, veteran with scars from the Centauri Wars, stood up slowly. His weathered face showed no fear, only disgust. "Run," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "We didn't spend 200 years building our civilization just to abandon it at the first sign of trouble." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled officers. These were men and women who had fought pirates, rebels, and hostile aliens. They had carved out humanity's place in the galaxy through courage and determination. "Sir," said Colonel Mina from the Mars Defense Force, "the reports from Melodia are clear. The Vorthak destroyed 12 billion beings in 6 hours. Their technology is far superior to ours." "Technology isn't everything," Taiwan replied. "The Melodians were peaceful. They had no real military. We've been fighting since we climbed down from the trees." Admiral Soman raised her hand for silence. "I've reviewed all the data. The Vorthak have superior weapons, stronger ships, and overwhelming numbers. By every logical calculation, we cannot win a direct military confrontation." The room fell quiet. Everyone knew the mathematics of warfare. Numbers didn't lie. "But," Soman continued, "logic isn't everything either. The Council expects us to run because that's what every other species has done. The Vorthak expect us to run for the same reason. Maybe it's time someone did something unexpected." Captain Jinho, who had witnessed Melodia's destruction firsthand, spoke up. "What are you suggesting, Admiral?" "I'm suggesting we make them regret coming to our home." The debate that followed lasted 18 hours. Some officers argued for evacuation. Others pushed for a fighting retreat to buy time for civilians to escape. But gradually, a different consensus emerged. Humanity would stand and fight. The decision sent shockwaves across human space. Every colony, every space station, every ship received the same message. Earth would not be abandoned. The human species would make its stand in the system where it was born. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From the ice mines of Europa came volunteer ships loaded with frozen water for reactor fuel. The agricultural world sent food supplies that would last for months. The industrial colonies began converting civilian factories to produce weapons and ammunition. Engineer Jisoo led the most ambitious project. Her teams worked around the clock to retrofit civilian ships with military capabilities. Cargo haulers were equipped with missile pods. Passenger liners had their hulls reinforced and armed with plasma cannons. Even small courier ships were modified to carry nuclear warheads. "We can't match their technology," Jisoo explained to her engineering teams, "but we can be unpredictable. They'll expect to fight a conventional fleet. Instead, they'll face 1,000 different surprises." Dr. Kyung took a different approach. Her biological research teams had obtained samples of Vorthak genetic material from old battlefields, while other scientists had used this data to study Vorthak anatomy. Kyung had a more creative idea. "Every species has weaknesses," she told her research staff. "The Vorthak have been apex predators for 3,000 years. That means they've never experienced real fear. Their brains might not even know how to process that emotion properly." Her team worked to develop a biological weapon that would target Vorthak neural pathways, not to kill them, but to make them feel something they had never felt before: genuine terror. Scout pilot Donghyuk led reconnaissance missions into the outer systems. His job was to map Vorthak fleet movements and report back on their numbers and capabilities. What he found was worse than anyone had feared. The Vorthak war fleet was massive beyond imagination. Over 10,000 ships of various sizes, from small fighters to planet-killing dreadnoughts. Donghyuk counted at least 50 ships larger than anything in the human fleet. "They're not just planning to destroy Earth," he reported to Admiral Soman. "They're planning to make it a spectacle. Long-range sensors show broadcasting equipment on many ships. They want the whole galaxy to watch us die." But the reconnaissance missions revealed something else. The Vorthak were supremely confident. Their fleet moved in loose formations with minimal defensive screens. They had never faced serious resistance, so they saw no reason to expect it now. Commander Nari used this information to develop new tactical doctrines. Her mixed-species training units practiced coordinated attacks that would exploit Vorthak overconfidence. Many alien volunteers had joined the Human Defense Force, not because they believed humanity could win, but because they wanted to die fighting rather than cowering. Speed and surprise will be our weapons, Nari told her pilots. Hit them hard, hit them fast, and get out before they can respond. Make them chase us through asteroid fields and nebulae where their size works against them. The alien volunteers brought their own advantages. Zephyrian pilots could withstand high-G maneuvers that would crush human bones. Altarian engineers understood shield technologies that might deflect Vorthak weapons. Kepler insectoids could coordinate multiple ship attacks with hive mind precision. As preparations intensified, the Vorthak fleet drew closer. Deep space sensors tracked their approach through the outer colonies. They made no attempt at stealth. Why would they? No prey had ever successfully hidden from them. The Vorthak war chief. Gorthax monitored human communications with amusement. These small, soft creatures were actually planning to fight. How entertaining. It had been centuries since prey species had provided any real sport. Usually they just screamed and died. Gorthax had earned his position by being the most successful hunter in Vorthak history. He had personally overseen the extinction of 47 different species. The idea that humans might pose a challenge was laughable. But as he reviewed the intelligence reports, something nagged at him. The humans weren't just preparing to fight. They were preparing to fight dirty. Their communication intercepts revealed plans for guerrilla tactics, civilian ship conversions, and biological weapons. Most prey species fought conventionally, trying to match Vorthak's strength with their own inferior strength. These humans seemed to understand they were outmatched, but instead of surrendering, they were adapting. It was interesting. Back on Earth, the final preparations were underway. Every major city had been converted into a fortress. Underground, bunkers held civilian populations while surface installations bristled with defensive weapons. The space elevators had been rigged with explosives. If the Vorthak tried to land ground forces, the massive structures would become kinetic weapons falling from orbit. Luna Base had been transformed into a military command center. Admiral Soman coordinated with fleet commanders throughout the solar system. Mars Colony served as a forward observation post, its orbital platforms loaded with sensor equipment and long-range missiles. The asteroid belt had been turned into a maze of hidden weapons platforms. Engineer Jisu's teams had hollowed out dozens of large asteroids and filled them with nuclear mines. Any Vorthak ship that tried to use the belt for cover would face a very unpleasant surprise. As the enemy fleet approached the edge of the solar system, humanity held its collective breath. Children who had been evacuated to underground shelters asked their parents when they could go home. Soldiers who had never faced an enemy like the Vorthak checked their weapons one more time. Ambassador Hunsik received a final communication from the Galactic Council. They offered one last chance for evacuation. Refugee ships from a dozen species stood ready to carry human survivors to safety. Hunsik's response was broadcast across the galaxy. Humanity thanks the Council for their offer. We choose to stay. The first Vorthak scout ships crossed into the outer solar system. Their sensors immediately detected the massive human fleet waiting for them. Thousands of ships of all sizes filled the space between Earth and Mars. War Chief Gorthax laughed when he saw the readings. The humans had actually assembled every ship they owned for this confrontation. It would save time. He could destroy their entire civilization in a single battle. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet. Attention, inferior beings. I am Gorthax, War Chief of the Vorthak Empire. You will surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and we will make your suffering last for days. Admiral Soman's reply was simple. Come and take it. The Vorthak war fleet accelerated toward Earth. Behind them came support ships carrying recording equipment to broadcast humanity's destruction across the galaxy. This would be a lesson every species would remember. But as the massive alien fleet moved deeper into the solar system, strange things began to happen. Scout ships reported unusual readings from the asteroid belt. Communication arrays detected human broadcasts on frequencies that should have been jammed. For the first time in 3,000 years of conquest, War Chief Gorthax felt something he didn't recognize. It took him several minutes to identify the emotion. Uncertainty. The Vorthak war fleet filled the outer solar system like a swarm of metal locusts. Their ships blotted out entire star fields as they moved toward Mars in perfect formation. War Chief Gorthax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the terror of worlds watching his prey prepare for slaughter. "Destroy the red planet first," he commanded. "Let them watch their colonies burn before we take their home world." The first strike hit Mars colony without warning. Massive energy beams turned the research stations into glowing craters. The mining platforms that had taken decades to build were vaporized in seconds. 5 million humans died in the opening moments of the battle. But something was wrong. The human fleet wasn't running. Captain Jinho led the first wave of defenders from his position near Jupiter's moons. The Soul's Pride was just a tiny speck compared to the massive Vorthak dreadnoughts, but it raced forward alongside hundreds of other human ships. "All units engage at will," Jinho broadcast to his squadron. "Make every shot count." The human attack was like throwing rocks at a mountain. Their plasma cannons and missile batteries barely scratched the armored hulls of Vorthak warships. Within minutes, dozens of human vessels were burning wreckage floating in space. But then Lieutenant Minjin did something that made War Chief Gorthax pause. His fighter had taken critical damage from a Vorthak plasma burst. His life support was failing, and his weapons were offline. By all logic, he should have ejected or tried to retreat. Instead, Minjin aimed his crippled ship directly at the engine core of a Vorthak heavy cruiser and pushed his throttles to maximum. The explosion was beautiful and terrible. The human fighter disappeared in a ball of nuclear fire that tore through the enemy ship's rear shields. Secondary explosions rippled along the cruiser's hull as its own fuel cells ignited. The massive vessel split in half, its crew of 3,000 Vorthak warriors dying in the void. Gorthax had seen kamikaze attacks before, but not like this. The human pilot hadn't screamed or begged for mercy. He had sung. Some primitive battle, song in his species' ancient tongue. More human ships began copying Minjin's tactic. Damaged fighters would ram themselves into Vorthak vessels rather than retreat. Captains of burning frigates would set collision courses with enemy dreadnoughts. It was insane. It was illogical. It was effective. The Vorthak had superior shields and armor, but their ships were designed to fight other ships, not guided missiles the size of cruisers. Each human suicide attack took out vessels worth billions of credits and hundreds of experienced warriors. "Sir," reported Gorthax's tactical officer, "we've lost 12 ships to these ramming attacks. The humans are using their smaller vessels as weapons." "Adapt our formations," Gorthax ordered. "Increase distance between our ships. Use point defense systems to destroy damaged human vessels before they reach us." But the humans adapted faster. Commander Nari led a boarding party that somehow infiltrated a Vorthak battle cruiser. Gorthax watched in disbelief as the enemy ship's own weapons turned on the Vorthak fleet. The humans had taken control of an entire vessel in less than an hour. "How is this possible?" demanded the war chief. "Our ships are designed to prevent boarding actions." "The humans are using unconventional entry methods," his officer replied nervously. "They're cutting through waste disposal ports, maintenance shafts, and ventilation systems. Areas too small for our warriors to defend effectively." Sergeant Yuna moved through the corridors of the captured Vorthak ship like a ghost. Her combat armor was designed for stealth rather than strength. Where Vorthak warriors relied on brute force and intimidation, humans used speed and surprise. She found a group of 50 Vorthak soldiers trying to retake their ship's bridge. They were 12 feet tall with claws that could cut through steel. She was 5 feet 6 inches and armed with nothing but a plasma rifle and her wits. The fight lasted 30 seconds. When it was over, all 50 Vorthak were dead. The key was using their size against them. In the narrow corridors of their own ship, the massive aliens couldn't maneuver effectively. Yuna darted between their legs, firing at weak points in their armor. She used their own weapons against them, turning their strength into a liability. Dr. Kyung watched the battle from her laboratory on Luna Station. Her biological weapon was ready for deployment. The fear virus had been loaded into specially modified missiles that would disperse it as an aerosol throughout enemy ships. "Will it work?" asked her assistant, Dr. Bora. "In theory, yes," Kyung replied. "The Vorthak brain has never developed proper fear responses because they've never been prey. Introducing artificial fear stimuli should cause system overload. The Yao. First test missile hit a Vorthak destroyer. For several minutes, nothing seemed to happen. Then the ship's behavior changed dramatically. Instead of maintaining formation, it began evasive maneuvers. Its weapons fire became erratic and unfocused. On the bridge of that destroyer, Commander Vexcol experienced something no Vorthak had felt in millennia. Terror flooded through his nervous system like liquid fire. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound became a predator stalking him. "Retreat!" he screamed, his voice breaking with panic. "They're everywhere! We have to run!" His crew stared in shock. Vorthak warriors didn't retreat. Vorthak commanders didn't show fear. But their leader was cowering behind his command chair, shaking like a prey animal. More fear missiles struck other ships. The psychological effect spread through the fleet faster than any physical weapon. Vorthak warriors who had never known doubt began to question their invincibility. War Chief Gorthax felt the change in his forces. Ships that should have been advancing were holding position. Captains were requesting permission to withdraw. Some vessels had gone completely silent. "Status report," he demanded. "Sir, we believe the humans have deployed some form of psychological warfare," his science officer reported. "Our affected ships are showing signs of fear response." Gorthax's claws extended involuntarily. Fear was a concept barely understood in Vorthak culture. It was something that happened to prey, not predators. The idea that his warriors could be made afraid was more disturbing than any physical weapon. But the humans weren't finished with their surprises. Engineer Jisoo had been working on her secret project for weeks. Scattered throughout the asteroid belt were dozens of civilian ships that appeared to be fleeing the battle. Refugee vessels, cargo haulers, and mining platforms all running for the outer system. When the Vorthak pursuit ships moved to intercept them, they discovered the truth. The freighter Lucky Strike shed its disguise like a snake shedding skin. False hull plating fell away to reveal massive railguns and nuclear missile pods. The terrified refugees were actually heavily armed warships pretending to run away. The ambush was devastating. Vorthak ships that had spread out to hunt easy prey found themselves surrounded by enemies they couldn't see coming. The asteroid belt became a killing field where human ships used stealth and deception to even the odds. Scout pilot Donghyuk led his squadron through the chaos. His fighters were outnumbered 50-1, but they had something the Vorthak lacked: desperation and creativity. "Ghost Squadron, this is lead," he broadcast to his pilots. "Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to survive long enough to hurt them." His ships darted through the debris field like minnows avoiding sharks. They used wrecked human vessels as cover, fired from behind asteroids, and disappeared into sensor shadows before the enemy could respond. When Vorthak fighters tried to pursue them, they found themselves flying through carefully prepared kill zones. Hidden weapon platforms opened fire from all directions. Nuclear mines disguised as debris exploded in their faces. Admiral Samin watched the battle unfold from her command center. The human fleet was taking terrible losses, but they were making the Vorthak pay for every victory. More importantly, they were learning. "Pattern analysis shows Vorthak response time to new tactics," reported her tactical officer. "They adapt to our strategies in approximately 47 minutes. Then we change tactics every 45 minutes, Soman replied. "Keep them guessing. Make them react to us instead of dictating the terms of engagement." The space around Mars became a graveyard of ships from both sides. But something unprecedented was happening. The Vorthak were taking casualties. Real casualties. Ships that had conquered star systems were being destroyed by primitive human vessels. War Chief Gorthax stared at his tactical display in growing disbelief. His fleet still had overwhelming superiority in numbers and firepower. By every measure, they were winning the battle. So why did he feel like they were losing? The answer came to him as he watched another human suicide attack destroy one of his heavy cruisers. These creatures weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to make winning too expensive. They were making every meter of space cost Vorthak blood. For 3,000 years, conquest had been easy. Prey species would resist briefly, then surrender when they realized the futility of fighting. The Vorthak would take their worlds and enslave or kill the survivors. But humans weren't surrendering. Even when their ships were crippled and their weapons were gone, they kept fighting. They turned their own vessels into weapons. They used tactics no civilized species would consider. They fought like cornered animals with nothing left to lose. War Chief Gorthak stood in his command chamber aboard the Terror of Worlds, staring at casualty reports that should not exist. In 3 days of fighting, he had lost over 400 ships. 400, against a species that barely knew how to build proper starships. The humans were supposed to be extinct by now. Instead, they were becoming more dangerous with each passing hour. "Sir," his communications officer announced nervously, "we're receiving a transmission from Sub-Chief Kravak. His battle group is reporting unusual difficulties." Gorthax activated the communication link. Kravak's image appeared on the screen, and the war chief was shocked by what he saw. The sub-chief's usually perfect armor was scorched and damaged. His eyes showed something Gorthax had never seen in a Vorthak warrior. Doubt. "War chief, these humans fight like no prey we have ever encountered. They do not retreat when defeated. They do not surrender when overwhelmed. My flagship was boarded by 12 of them. 12, they killed 300 of my warriors before we stopped them. You allowed 12 primitives to board a heavy cruiser?" Gorthax's voice carried a dangerous edge. "They came through the waste recycling system. No one thought to guard it because no rational being would crawl through ship sewage to attack us." Kravak's mandibles clicked in distress. "War Chief, these creatures are not rational. They fight like they want to die." The communication cut out as Kravak's ship exploded. Through his tactical display, Gorthax watched a human destroyer ramming into the sub-chief's vessel at full speed. Both ships disappeared in a ball of nuclear fire. Commander Nari had orchestrated the boarding action that killed Kravak. Her Special Forces team knew they wouldn't survive the mission, but that wasn't the point. The point was to make the Vorthak afraid to sleep safely on their own ships. She moved through the corridors of another captured Vorthak vessel, leading a mixed team of humans and alien volunteers. The ship's original crew of 2,000 had been reduced to scattered groups hiding in storage compartments. "Sector 7 clear," reported Corporal Wu Jin over the communication link. "Found another group of Vorthak hiding in the armory. They surrendered without fighting." Nari paused. Vorthak warriors surrendering? That was impossible. The concept didn't exist in their culture, yet her teams were reporting more and more cases of enemy soldiers laying down their weapons and begging for mercy. Dr. Kyung's fear virus was working better than anyone had expected. The artificial terror wasn't just affecting individual Vorthak. It was spreading through their social structure like a plague. Warriors who had never questioned orders were now refusing to enter certain areas of their ships. Officers were requesting medical transfers rather than face human boarding parties. On the bridge of the captured vessel, Nari found the ship's captain cowering behind his command chair. The massive alien looked up at her with eyes full of panic. "Please," he whispered, in broken human language. "No more pain. We surrender ship. Take prisoners. Show mercy." Nari felt a strange mixture of pity and disgust. These were the creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years. These were the monsters that had destroyed entire civilizations for sport. "Your species doesn't understand mercy," she told the Vorthak captain. "But maybe it's time you learned." Instead of killing the survivors, she had them locked in their own brig. Word of human mercy toward surrendering. Enemies spread through the Vorthak fleet faster than their own communications could carry it. The psychological impact was devastating. Vorthak culture was built on the concept of absolute dominance. Showing mercy was seen as weakness. Being shown mercy was seen as ultimate shame. The humans weren't just defeating them in battle. They were undermining the very foundation of Vorthak society. Scout pilot Dongyuk led another deep strike mission against enemy supply lines. His ghost squadron had evolved from desperate survivors into precision hunters. They knew every asteroid in the belt, every debris field that could hide a ship, every sensor shadow that could mask their approach. "Target acquired," he reported to his squadron. "Vorthak supply convoy, 6 ships plus escorts, standard attack pattern Delta." The ambush was perfect. Human fighters appeared from 3 directions at once, firing nuclear torpedoes at point-blank range. The supply ships, loaded with fuel and ammunition, exploded in chain reactions that lit up the entire sector. But something unexpected happened during the escape. One of the Vorthak escort captains broadcast a message on all frequencies. Ghost. Squadron, this is Captain Vexthar of the destroyer Bloodspear. I request single combat with your leader. Donghyuk was puzzled. Single combat was an ancient Vorthak tradition, but they had never offered it to prey species before. It was considered an honor reserved for equals. This is Ghost Leader. I accept your challenge. The two ships met in empty space between Mars and the asteroid belt. Donghyuk's fighter was a tiny speck compared to the massive Vorthak destroyer, but size didn't matter in single combat. This was about skill, courage, and honor. The duel lasted 20 minutes. Both pilots pushed their ships to the limit, dancing through space in a deadly ballet of plasma fire and missile strikes. In the end, superior human reflexes and creativity won out over Vorthak strength and tradition. Captain Vexthar died with honor, but his final transmission was heard throughout the enemy fleet. The humans are worthy opponents. They fight with courage we have not seen in 1,000 years. Back on Earth, Engineer Jisoo worked frantically to produce new weapons and defenses. The planet had become a massive factory dedicated to war. Every civilian facility had been converted to military production. Children too young to fight worked in assembly lines. The elderly volunteered for dangerous jobs that younger people couldn't be spared for. We need more ships, Admiral Soman told her during a brief planning meeting. The fleet is taking heavy casualties, and reinforcements from the colonies won't arrive for weeks. Give me 72 hours, Jisoo replied. I have an idea, but it's going to require every construction drone on Luna. What Jisoo built in those 3 days changed the nature of space combat forever. Instead of traditional ships, she created swarms of small, cheap drones. Each one carried a single nuclear warhead and basic guidance systems. They weren't sophisticated enough to be called fighters, but there were thousands of them. When the drone swarm hit the Vorthak fleet, it was like being attacked by a cloud of angry hornets. Individual drones were easy to destroy, but there were too many to stop them all. They swarmed over enemy vessels, detonating against hulls, engines, and weapon systems. War Chief Gorthax watched in growing fury as his mighty warships were nibbled to death by tiny human machines. This wasn't warfare, as the Vorthak understood. This was pest control in reverse. Deploy our reserve forces, he commanded. All ships advance to Earth orbit. We will end this now. But as his fleet moved deeper into the solar system, they encountered Admiral Soman's final surprise. The space around Earth was filled with debris from the ongoing battle. Wrecked ships, destroyed space stations, and scattered asteroid fragments created a maze of obstacles. What the Vorthak didn't realize was that much of the debris was fake. Jisoo's engineering teams had built thousands of holographic projectors that created the illusion of wreckage while hiding functional weapons platforms. When the enemy fleet moved into Earth orbit, they found themselves in the middle of a shooting gallery. Weapons emerged from every piece of debris. Nuclear mines disguised as ship fragments exploded throughout their formation. The trap was so well concealed that even experienced Vorthak sensors couldn't tell real wreckage from hidden threats. The battle for Earth orbit was the bloodiest fighting of the war. Vorthak dreadnoughts traded fire with human defense platforms at point-blank range. The space around humanity's homeworld became a hell of plasma beams and nuclear explosions. But something else was happening in the depths of space. Other species were watching the battle through long-range sensors and communication intercepts. For the first time in galactic history, someone was making the Vorthak bleed. Ships began arriving from the outer systems. Not human ships, alien, vessels from dozens of different species. They came in small groups at first, then in larger formations. The Zephyrians sent their lightning-fast interceptors. The Altarians provided shield generators. The insectoid species from Kepler contributed their hive mind coordination abilities. Ambassador Hyunsik coordinated the growing alliance from his command center on Luna. Species that had hidden from the Vorthak for centuries were finally ready to fight back. Humanity had shown them that the galaxy's apex predators could be hurt. Why are you helping us? Hyunsik asked a Melodian refugee captain, who had arrived with a squadron of salvaged warships. Because you gave us something we thought was lost, forever, the captain replied. Hope. The tide of battle began to turn. The Vorthak still had superior numbers and firepower, but they were no longer fighting just humans. They faced an alliance of species united by centuries of fear and hatred. More importantly, they were fighting an enemy that refused to accept defeat. Every time Gorthax thought he had broken human resistance, they found new ways to hurt him. Every victory came at a price his forces could barely afford. The final battle began when Admiral Soman made a decision that shocked both her allies and enemies. Instead of defending Earth, she ordered the human fleet to attack the Vorthak homeworld. Ma'am, that's suicide, protested General Taewan over the communication link. We barely have enough ships to defend our own system. That's exactly why it will work, Soman replied. They expect us to cower behind our defenses. They don't expect us to take the fight to their front door. The human fleet, supported by ships from a dozen allied species, jumped to hyperspace, while the Vorthak were still besieging Earth. It was the most audacious military move in galactic history. War Chief Gorthax received the news while directing the orbital bombardment of human defense platforms. For a moment, he couldn't process what his communications officer was telling him. Repeat that report, he demanded. Sir, long-range sensors confirm a large fleet heading for our home system. The humans they're attacking Vorthak Prime. Gorthax's claws scraped against his command console. No species had ever dared to attack the Vorthak homeworld. It was the most heavily defended system in the galaxy, protected by automated defense platforms that had been built over centuries of conquest. But those defenses had been designed to stop conventional attacks by conventional enemies. They had never faced humans. Captain Jinho led the assault on Vorthak Prime from the bridge of the Soul's Pride. Around him flew ships from dozens of species, all united by a common goal, ending 3,000 years of terror. Remember, he broadcast to the fleet, we're not here for conquest. We're here to prove that bullies can be stopped. The Vorthak homeworld was a fortress planet surrounded by weapon platforms, defense stations, and patrol fleets. But most of them their forces were at Earth trying to crush human resistance. The defenses that remained were automated systems designed to fight predictable enemies. Engineer Jisoo had spent weeks studying captured Vorthak technology. Her analysis revealed a critical weakness. Their automated defenses were programmed to engage the largest threats first. The systems would focus on dreadnoughts and carriers while ignoring smaller support vessels. The human attack used this against them. The fleet approached in reverse formation, with tiny fighters leading massive battleships. The defense systems locked onto the small craft and ignored the real threats approaching behind them. All fighters, implement Trojan Horse Protocol, Jinho commanded. The lead fighters were piloted by volunteers who knew they wouldn't survive the mission. They flew directly at the defense platforms, drawing fire and creating gaps in the automated coverage. Behind them came the real attack force. Dr. Kyung's fear virus had evolved during the months of warfare. The latest version didn't just cause terror, it created complete neural breakdown in Vorthak brains. When her biological weapons hit the orbital stations, the alien crew simply collapsed in catatonic fear. The landing on Vorthak Prime was led by General Taewan himself. The old soldier had insisted on joining the ground assault despite his age and the protests of his staff. I didn't spend my whole career fighting in space just to miss the most important battle in human history, he told them. The surface of the Vorthak homeworld was unlike anything humans had seen before. Massive cities stretched across continents, built to house beings 12 feet tall. The architecture was designed to intimidate with sharp angles and dark materials that absorbed light. But the cities were also poorly designed for defense. The Vorthak had never expected to fight on their own world. Streets were too wide, buildings too tall, and defensive positions were minimal. Human soldiers moved through the alien metropolis like ghosts. Their smaller size allowed them to use maintenance tunnels, ventilation shafts, and service corridors that Vorthak defenders couldn't access. What had been an advantage for the aliens in space combat became a liability in urban warfare. Commander Nari coordinated the assault on the planetary capital. Her mixed species teams used tactics that would have been impossible for a single race. Zephyrian flyers provided aerial reconnaissance. Altarian engineers disabled defense systems. Human soldiers led the actual fighting. The Vorthak defenders fought bravely, but they were fighting in an environment they didn't understand against an enemy that refused to follow conventional rules. Human troops used their own vehicles as weapons, driving explosive-laden trucks into enemy positions. They turned civilian infrastructure against the defenders, flooding subway tunnels and cutting power to military districts. But the most important battle was happening in the center of the capital, where War Chief Gorthax had returned to lead the defense of his homeworld personally. Captain Jinho found the Vorthak leader in the ruins of the planetary command center. The massive alien stood among the wreckage of his civilization's greatest achievements, his black armor scarred by battle. "So," Gorthax said in perfect human language, "the prey has become the predator." "We were never prey," Jinho replied. "We just hadn't met you yet." The duel between them was brief but decisive. Gorthax was stronger, faster, and more experienced in personal combat. But Jinho fought with something the Vorthak chief had never encountered: the desperate courage of someone fighting for his entire species' survival. When Gorthax fell, something unprecedented happened. The remaining Vorthak forces stopped fighting. Their entire culture was built around following the strongest leader. With their war chief defeated, they had no framework for continuing resistance. But Jinho's next action shocked everyone, including his own troops. Instead of executing the defeated Vorthak, he offered medical aid to their wounded. Instead of destroying their cities, he called for humanitarian supplies to be sent from Earth. "Why?" asked the dying Gorthax. "We showed your species no mercy. We would have killed every human in existence." "Because someone has to break the cycle," Jinho replied. "Someone has to show that being strong doesn't mean being cruel." The news of Vorthak Prime's fall spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communications. For 3,000 years, entire civilizations had lived in fear of these apex predators. Now they were not just defeated, but conquered by a species that most aliens still considered primitive. Dr. Kyung led the medical teams that developed a cure for the fear virus. The process was difficult because Vorthak brains had to be retrained to process emotions they had never experienced naturally. Many of the former warriors suffered what humans would recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. "They're like children learning to feel fear for the first time," Kyung explained to the medical staff. "It's actually quite sad. Imagine never knowing caution or uncertainty, then suddenly being overwhelmed by both." Some Vorthak chose integration into the new galactic order. They worked with human engineers to rebuild their devastated worlds, learning technologies focused on creation rather than destruction. Engineer Jisoo established exchange programs where young Vorthak studied human engineering principles, while humans learned advanced Vorthak metallurgy. Others chose exile. These unrepentant warriors, unable to accept their defeat, fled to the galaxy's edge. They formed raider bands that occasionally attacked merchant vessels, but they never again posed a systematic threat to galactic civilization. Commander Nari established joint training academies where humans, reformed Vorthak, and other species learned to work together. The mixed units became the foundation for a new galactic defense force designed to prevent any single species from achieving the dominance the Vorthak had held. The transformation wasn't easy. Many species found it difficult to accept their former tormentors as allies. Vorthak individuals struggled with concepts like cooperation and compromise that went against their biological programming. But gradually, a new order emerged from the ashes of the old empire. Ambassador Hyunsik addressed the reformed Galactic Council from its new headquarters on Earth. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the Great Assembly Hall, including several Vorthak, who had earned their place through service and sacrifice. "The age of apex predators is over," he declared. "No single species will ever again hold the power of life and death over entire civilizations. We will protect each other, or we will all fall separately." The new galactic constitution included principles that would have been impossible under Vorthak rule, the right of all species to exist, protection for weaker civilizations, and collective defense against any threat. Scout pilot Dong Hyuk, now promoted to admiral, led the new joint patrols that enforced galactic peace. His Ghost Squadron had become the model for integrated military units where species worked together, despite their different capabilities and cultures. On Vorthak Prime, now renamed New Harmony, former warriors worked alongside human colonists to build a different kind of civilization. The massive cities were being converted into centers of learning and culture rather than military might. General Taiwan, despite his protests about being too old for peacetime duties, became the head of the new military academy. He trained officers from dozens of species in the art of warfare, but more importantly, in the wisdom of when not to fight. The hardest lesson for any warrior, he told his students, is knowing when you've won enough. The galaxy had found its new apex predator, but humanity proved to be unlike any species that had held such power before. They used their strength to protect rather than conquer, to build rather than destroy.